Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to take a look at our hero's third game in the Lichess 45-45 season that's currently running. This is going to be Dynamic Commander in white versus Kai Mate in black. Let's get into it. Alright, so this game has got a lot going on. We're going to try and avoid spending too much time in the positions that do not take too much time, because there's a lot of positions that do take quite a bit of time. So this game, interestingly enough, I don't think really is a position that either player has played online before, because as soon as white played d4, and white happens to be a mainly London, Jobava London player, black actually played the Mikenas defense with knight c6. So this is very similar to like a reverse Alekhine, right? So with e4, knight f6, you get a similar position. And obviously white has an option here to try and push this pawn. Black is kind of inviting it, to be honest. And if you ever did, then black would continue to jump the knight to the side. And for instance, this is very similar to how an Alekhine would look on the other side of the board. Where white really gets a lot of pawns out into the center, and black is going to try and chip away at them with a knight that's now done a lot of work already in the opening. But this is not what happened, but just to say, very interesting opening, not something that I think either player has placed too much. I don't find any games for them to have played this, so I'm guessing that black did a little bit of prep beforehand to put white in a position that they haven't faced before. However, black didn't really get too much influence on white's play, it seems, because they just went straight for the knight f3. This does happen to be the main line as well. It is also a very standard move that the London player will play. We're going to look at bishop f4 coming out, and then e3, and then the other knight might come out, or c3 might happen. Standard London stuff, right? Alright, so in this position, the main move is actually to play d5 and try and just get your stake in the center for black as well. But black decided to be a little bit more passive, potentially trying to avoid committing their pawns too far, and they played d6 as well. This is a very good move still. There's nothing specifically wrong with it. Your light square bishop will come out potentially to g4 or maybe to f5. All of these positions are still completely playable. And so in this position, I think the main move again would be something like e4. If you look at master games, black just gives up the center because they didn't play d5, and white says, thank you very much, I'll take that. But white also tried to avoid getting put into a position they don't know, and they just continued with their normal London setup. And this is obviously the main strength of the London. It's not a lot of options for black to really mess with it from the black side. White is normally able to develop very naturally without having to worry too much about what black is doing. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, black doesn't really get to hamper the London's development too much. Alright, and so this position, black continued still with a very good master move, just knight f6 getting out. Now obviously also stopping e4, potentially looking at a bit more control in the center. Can't go wrong with a bit of center control, right? And here, again, white not spending too much time. They're actually gaining time at this point still, just continuing with their normal plan. And in this case, actually, the black player, our hero for this game, actually deviated slightly from what masters would play. So masters tend to play g6 here and develop their dark square bishop onto the long diagonal. This is obviously something you could do, you don't have to, but black actually decided to play h6, and this has got probably about two main points behind it. The first one, and I think this is the main one that the black player was thinking about, was to put the light square bishop out and have a cubby for it over on h7 if you ever want it. This is something I myself often play as well, and this is very, reverse London-esque. There's nothing specifically wrong with it. It's nice to get your light square bishop out if you're going to be playing pawns up in the center on light squares, for instance. And the second thing you can do, and maybe the white player was a bit more concerned about it than the black player really was, is you can play g5 and just question that dark square bishop instantly. So for instance, if white continues with something like bishop d3, you could play g5 here, and that light square bishop is kind of getting out of squares. You can jump your knight and you can try and snap it off there. You obviously could also jump your knight instantly, but sometimes you don't really want to do that. So there is also a reason for maybe do this and then just start pushing pawns on that side of the board. But I'm not sure if this is the greatest plan, especially because black isn't really developing. But maybe white was a bit concerned about this, because after h6 was on the board, they actually played the same move on their side, h3, and now both of these bishops coming out from the opposite end of the board will have a little cubby on the h file just being safe and looking at the rest of the board from over there, kind of like a long-range shot sniper, as we sometimes say. Alright, so bishop f5, and in this case there's actually one master game that continues where they just ended up trying to trade off the bishops, but here we actually just see a very standard completion for the triangle that London players really love, and although we don't have a pawn on d5, which is probably the more natural way to play against the London in general, you want to get some control in the center. Although maybe black really wanted to keep the e5 square under control as well. They did continue with the rest of the natural plan, which is going to be e6, and I can get your dark square bishop out. You can castle, and you have both of your bishops with some good little spots where they can sit, and they can't be hampered or traded off too quickly. Alright, so bishop b5, slightly unnatural, not immensely like in that unnatural. White does have some options here to put some pressure on the knight, but considering they've played such a standard game so far, I would have expected them to just put the bishop and the knight out and continue. So the way that White has played has kind of lulled me into a sense of thinking that they're really just going for the standard opening, and from there they will continue. The bishop b5 is slightly different. It's not a bad move, it's perfectly fine, and I actually think I'm about to sneeze. Alright. Yeah, so perfectly fine, just putting a bit of pressure on that knight that originally came out. Also, currently that knight can't jump away because it's pinned, and it's protected by a pawn only, so it might have to, black might have to acquiesce to getting double C pawns depending on how we play here. So bishop e7, just continuing with the natural plan that black has already played, and white does continue again, deviating slightly from their opening. They've probably seen kind of a chance now for themselves here. You have to consider whether it's worth trading off your strong bishop, in this case, for the knight on c6. I would argue, if I was black, I would actually maybe welcome that. I do think that there's some chances here for black to put some pressure on the queen side, and there's a lot of white squares that are open. Of course, there are ways for white to try to close that off with e4, but probably not the most optimal trade if you were to take these two pieces off. Even if you got to double up the pawns, white's putting themselves in a position where their other pieces are going to have to do a lot of hard work to cover up the fact that they don't have a light square bishop, but they have those holes, and they have black's light square bishop looking at it. Anyway, so they're currently putting a lot of pressure on this knight. It is possible for black just to castle here, and this is kind of like top Lichess play, and in that case, take, queen takes, and then there's a little, you can kind of tickle the queen a bit, you can get out to the b file, and it's arguable whether or not white's play really gave them much of an advantage. Black has a lot of good activity at the same time as well, maybe knight over, and then from there you can continue. But in this game, actually, black just said, cool, I'm just going to put my queen here, get it off the back rank, and break this pin. Clearly now, obviously, the one thing you have to be very careful of as black is, does something like d5 work? Because now, obviously, also the knight is not just pinned to your king, but also pinned to your queen. In this case, it doesn't work, and all the other pawn moves are just a little bit too slow to really get there in time. There's a pretty good set of defenders on the d5 square right now for black as well. But, if we had d5 on the board, I think, personally, for me as black, I'd feel a little bit safer. Although, well, maybe not, because then the knight comes in, so perhaps not. Alright, so white does continue now with c4, maybe deciding to change up their game plan as well. Still haven't castled, still haven't developed their last minor piece. Potentially they're looking at something like this now, either to induce a pawn move, or potentially just trying to put the knight over on c3, because also now they've changed their approach a little bit, so potentially they don't need to have the knight a little bit more passive on d2 instead. So here black castles, gets out of the way, and white says, cool enough, I'll castle as well. Of course, in this case now, everyone's castled, so there's no real problem in taking a bishop, if it was possible to take a bishop on g6 or g3, because if the h-pawn takes, the half-open file doesn't really specifically favor either player at this point. Alright, so here a6, black kind of insists on the situation. You want to trade this off, you have to now, because your bishop is obviously kind of stuck. c4 makes it kind of inevitable that you have to trade, so take, and black doesn't take with the queen and trade off. This is still perfectly fine, I think, but there's no real reason to get queens off so quickly, so rather just take with the pawn and say, thank you very much, I will take my doubled pawns, but I will also get a little bit of action down the d file potentially. White brings out their last minor piece, and indeed black does play their f-rook over to b file. And this is obviously now also because they're trying to protect the a6 pawn, but they could have tried a little trick here. So if you play rook ab8, for instance, can I just please press the correct button here? If you play rook ab8 here, actually that pawn is completely poisoned because the queen will be trapped afterwards, because this light square diagonal is closed off the same way that the bishop was trapped because of that. So if queen takes, then you put the rook back, and all of a sudden the queen has very few squares. Only this one is available if you don't want to immediately trade, but after queen b7, then you bring the other rook over and you have to trade off the queen. There's really no way to go around it. So it's a little tricky that black could have gone for. I'm not sure if white would have taken the pawn. If I was playing in this game, I might have played it. You have to consider if they don't take, they play just up here. Did you get much? Was it worth it? I'm not so sure. Maybe at that point you just feel a bit silly that you put your a rook on the b file. Although the same trick still remains, so you could probably end up doing something in the center instead. And if white ever does grab the pawn, you can then spring the trap, as long as you have the right setup with the rooks and the queen still guarding the pawns properly. But anyway, so they brought over their f-rook instead. Now they've got two rooks on the side of the board, one on the open file, one behind their isolated pawn. And here b4 was played, and b4 is unfortunately a little bit of a mistake already. This is not a game-losing blunder or anything like that, but it does create a little bit of a chance for black to get a bit active and get a bit into that white position using the light square bishop, the bishop that is now unopposed because it's been traded off for the c6 knight. And black did find it. They played bishop d3, and now you're hitting the rook and you're hitting the c pawn, which is not defended. The c pawn wasn't defended before by any other pawns, but the queen was still looking at it, right? So the normal move b3 was still perfectly fine probably, and from here the game could have continued. b4, a little bit of a mistake for the white side, unfortunately hangs their c4 pawn, and black did find it. Now the rook has to move. You could put it kind of anywhere you want. Maybe the rook over here, hitting the bishop so it has to move, and also maybe trying to get it across the queen on the black side. All of these moves are perfectly fine still at this point. I don't think there's any big problem. Alright, so anyway, they played the over to rook e1, and then they took the pawn. So now black is up a pawn, and it's really nice for them. The position isn't specifically winning or anything. It's like -1, so anything could happen, and anything did happen. Alright, so here now we have a3, and this obviously kind of solidifies the pawn over here. But actually this is another little blunder, although I have to admit, looking at the so the engine now says actually black has a winning advantage, -2 and a bit, and the move they have to play here is a5. I looked at the line that comes out, and I gotta admit it's not nearly as clear as I would have liked if I was going to play this. So I'll just show you quickly what the line looks like. And then you take ones, and then you play your knight out. So you're hitting this knight, and you hit this rook, and then you take the knight, and you take the pawn. So now you've got your double b pawn has now become a double d pawn instead. There's a lot of pawns in the center, and you can try and push through. You've also got this weak b pawn to look at, and this bishop is sitting in a really nice hole, although it can get pushed around a little bit with a knight to d2. But I don't see an instant win, so clearly this is a positional advantage that black is now just going to slowly push through. Something that we have to be careful of, and it shows up even in this position here where black is completely winning, is that black's back rank is opening up a tiny bit, and the queen is now looking at this light square diagonal, the one that black was, I think, so happily owning previously with the only light square bishop on the board. But anyway, so black didn't really see that. They played a different move, which is still, I think, very natural. Just bishop over to b5, hitting that queen directly. And they still have the idea of a5, they just didn't play it instantly. So here it gets traded off after queen c2 with the knight. And now black does get their pawns undoubled. This is now a half open file for white, although there isn't immediately any pressure. Black does also have a bishop over here on e7, which is a little bit silly. Again, this d6 move, I'm wondering if d5 might be a good one to try and do after maybe a rook over, protecting the pawn. Maybe you want to try and get your knight over here to try and get the bishop out of the way. I'm not really sure how to go here, but definitely this bishop is not very happy. It's a little bit of an unhappy piece. And based on that, I would say that it looks like white is still doing pretty okay, but the engine does say this is actually pretty good for black at this point already. Alright, so white took the pawn. Otherwise, obviously, black's going to be taking the pawn either way, and their b-pawn isn't defended. They could have defended it with the rook at this point. They no longer have the light square problems here. But anyway, they took, and black takes back. And here in this position of the e4, where white decides, alright, cool, I'm going to try and take over the center here, try and cause some, pose some problems for black over here, because obviously the queen side is starting to crumble a little bit. Black has a winning advantage. And what they have to do is they have to pile up on this pawn. So this pawn is currently on a dark square, and the square in front of it is defended by another pawn. So there's two ways you can go here. You can play a rook b8, b to a8, or you can play rook up to a4 first, also getting onto the fourth rank of your opponent's area, which has got a little bit of potential target material over here. Two pawns and a bishop all sitting kind of pretty, you've got a knight also helping out, so there could be something interesting here for you. Personally, I probably would have gone like this, and just, if they, for instance, try to double up on my pawn, maybe I would have done something like this. This is probably not the most accurate way to play, but it looks like black can get their pressure and their defense going at the same time. They also have a potential way to get the bishop or the knight back to protect that pawn, but both of those moves are a little bit uncomfortable. You'd obviously like to get your knight forward instead, but e4 takes away that square. And of course also the queen is currently still supporting e4, so it's a little bit more tricky for black to really unwind their kingside minor pieces in this case. Alright, but black decided just to liquidate the pawn, unfortunately not seeing that the potential long-term advantage they have is better than immediately just liquidating and having one extra pawn here. So they took the rook on the a file, takes back and takes the pawn. And from here on out we can see that things are not quite as easy for black anymore. We are up a pawn, but our minor pieces are slightly worse. Our extra pawn is kind of like a backwards pawn, so it doesn't really have any great ways to move forward here. We'd have to have an isolated one, and again this bishop and the rook and the queen, everyone's kind of staring at our open queen side now. So this has definitely not been the optimal situation. Black has a pawn, black is technically slightly better, but I would wager that a lot of people would take white in this position. You also have some potential discoveries over here if the king ever gets to h7. So just to say, king h7, e5 is completely losing as well. So you got to be careful. So there's been a check, and currently there's only about 3 ways to really block it. You can put your bishop on one of the back end squares or your knight. None of these moves is something that you want to do as black. And unfortunately, I think black chose the slightly worse one of all of them by playing the bishop over to d8. Now, d8 isn't terrible. I think the natural move, honestly, was probably more like bishop f8, because it's also helping, and the king's protecting it, and it might still eventually make some action happen. I'm assuming that black was looking at trying to get this bishop out eventually after they can play up, maybe, like c6, and the bishop will finally see some light. Because the knight obviously has a little bit of scope already being on f6. However, if white correctly plays here, they've got a winning advantage, kind of because of exactly what they did. They just unfortunately missed out on a little bit of a nuance on what they had to do. So I'm going to show you first just the first move white played. White played bishop d2, and you can see now the bishop hits the rook. And after the rook moves, quite likely not to b5, although it's possible, I guess, then the bishop can go to a5, and it can stare down at this pawn on c7, which is protected by the queen and the bishop. So it looks like there might be some way for white to take advantage of this backwards pawn now being kind of pinned in a few different ways. However, they needed to first crack open the center a tiny bit. They needed to play e5. Oopsie, again, trying to press on the button. So e5 hits the knight and hits the pawn. If you ever take the pawn here, then they can just take back with kind of anything they want, really. And the position is opening up in kind of a scary way. This pawn is a little bit weak, so maybe you want to take this way to make the knight move. but I think there's definitely some value in, for instance, trying to make the queen move first, because if it takes here, maybe there's a way you can, make some little plans happen like this. So I'll just put it on the board as an example. So maybe here I take, you take back, and then I do this, and I get you like this, and you don't have any checks on the A file, or on the first row, because my queen is covering both. So you're going to give me an exchange. You're up 2 pawns, but one of them is isolated and most likely falling in this position, because you're probably going to try and protect your knight, or protect your rook with your queen, and I think the only move you can do that with is here really. So it's a tricky situation for sure. However, the engine line would say something like this, and then knight e5, rather just jumping out of the way. We don't want to take, we don't want to open up this position when we already have this pinned and slightly weakened piece on the back rank. But now white can take, and then this is really the difference. They take here, you can't take with your queen obviously. If you take the bishop of the situation, they can still take, and they're protecting that pawn and hitting your backwards piece. So take the bishop, and then they take here, and then this guy's going to be falling, and your queen's also involved in this, which is not good, and again your king can't escape. So here you would take back, but then if you play bishop d2, that diagonal is open. And this is really the difference, where that bishop is now pinned and you can directly attack it. Your queen can also get involved if it has to. You can go over to c8 for instance, and also you have a very, very strong advantage in this situation, even though the knight is sitting on d5. Black has got a little bit more activity, but the pin piece is just too weak. So just to show you, so for instance, you can bring the rook back, and then instantly even the queen can come in, and you have to trade off, and then the bishop can come in, and again, your knight can't help defend this bishop, and it's going to be an unfortunate situation for black. They're going to go down a piece. Alright, so white unfortunately played bishop up first though, so bishop d2, same kind of idea. I can understand this completely, because e5 is not very clear at all. It's actually quite a complicated position that you get with that. You have to calculate quite a bit. That said, both players have a lot of time still, so I definitely think we could have spent a bit more time to consider it. But it does look like bishop d2 is very good. So visually it seems that white's got a great position here. They come with tempo, they can get on that diagonal, hit the backwards pawn. And that's kind of what's happening here anyway, right? So rook b7, and now the best move here is now actually d5. So the engine really wants you to just like poke at the center, where black's position is just so uncomfortable. If they ever play e5, this dark square bishop is just never leaving the back rank at all, and even if it does, I don't really know where it's going to go. But anyway, so the rook moved and they play bishop a5, which does look like a good idea, but now there's so much defense on this pawn that it's a little bit difficult to really crack through. You've got 2 attackers, you can try get a 3rd attacker with your rook in some way maybe, but there's really no way to break through here in a way that that gives white the advantage. So in this case now, black said, okay, hang on, I got to play g6. This also avoids any light squares opening up in this situation here. It gives their king a little spot to go to. And after the bishop came back, now trying to hit that weakened pawn, king comes up defending it. And again, e5 is a good move. Although at this point it's not actually winning, it's just a good move to consider. White actually played queen d3, which at first I thought, what are we doing? But the idea is clear after a second. They're going to go over to queen e3 and try and put pressure on the king here. So this bishop isn't pinned anymore, but frankly it doesn't really have much to do. And this rook, although it's active, isn't really doing much either. The queen is also not incredibly active, and the knight is still in a good square, but you can kick it at any time you need to with e5. So in this case, black played d5, trying to open up a little bit, trying to get the position a little bit more airy. Maybe they want to try and get their dark bishop out on this diagonal. Unfortunately, this is again a position that gives white a chance to have an advantage. Something better might have been something like bishop e7 directly, or just king h7, and then again here, even if you do this, this is protected, and you always have this g4 move if you need to, g5 move, just to get 2 pawns to blunt the dark bishop. Anyway, so after d5, knight e5, very, very nice, hitting the queen. And now we're going to see a little bit of a puzzle rush tactic, which is quite nice. Queen d6. And here you actually have a tactic already. So, I mean, you're welcome to pause and try and find it. It's really a really nice one. Basically, the problem is that the king is overworked. The king is protecting your backwards f-pawn, and your king is protecting your h6 pawn, which is weak now. So, if you said something like bishop h7, the king has to move. If the king ever takes, then that's a fantastic fork, and white would probably go on to win the game. If the king tries to get out of the way, then here comes the queen, hitting the backwards, hitting the 5 pawn, and after you play something like king d over here just to try and protect it from the queen coming in, then you can come back, and slowly but surely the position is just crumbling. Queen is also overworked now, trying to get everything defended at the back rank, and it's just a really, really nice position for white. So instead, apologies here. Oh, okay, one more move I wanted to show here. What if you try to just take the pawn first? This still works. It's kind of the exact same problem, right? So it doesn't really matter if you insert. The point that you just had to see was that this king is currently doing too much, and if you take it out in one space and it takes, you get a really, really nice fork, and if they don't take, then you just win the h-pawn and you open up the king a tiny bit. So white continue with their own plan. Again, unfortunate, just a little bit of tactical vision, not quite there. This pawn is weak. Probably the main way to defend it would be g5, like I alluded to earlier, just trying to blunt the situation. Something like h4 might give you pause for thought, though, because it looks like white is breaking down your structure here, and then it's a little bit difficult to defend. However, in this case, if you then move the knight, then you've got a lot of defenders. So let's just do h4 here. You've got a lot of defenders looking at that pawn right now. So another pawn and 2 minor pieces. You're getting more and more defensive, but white is attacking over here, so it's probably really nice to just have your pieces do something active and not have the light square bishop, the dark square bishop stuck on the background pinned to your king. Instead, what they did was they gave a little check, and probably the best move here was just king h2 directly. So king h2 just avoids any kind of problem, and it's just an equal game. Unfortunately, here with the bishop c1, white's trying to insist on their attack, but now it's a reverse situation. Now the white player has a bishop pinned to their king, and this again gives the opposite player, black, now has a slight advantage, about 1.6 or something like that. What they had to play in this case is g5, and then they can try and unwind their pieces forward. G5 here, they've got a lot of pressure on this pawn over here, but instead they try to play knight g8 instead and defend the pawn backwards. And maybe I think one of the reasons was also to try and get this knight kicked out, and or get the dark square bishop out finally, right? It's been stuck basically between these 3 squares the entire game. Alright, so knight back, defending the pawn, maybe kicking the white knight out, maybe bringing out the dark square bishop. King h2 now, good move, but unfortunately we still have that light square bishop, have that dark square bishop under attack, so it's a little bit of a tricky situation. You got to be careful that there isn't any tactic. Also, you do walk into, oh my goodness, you do walk in this pin now, so now f6 looks even scarier because this guy gets hit. So a little bit of a tricky one, although f6 is actually a mistake. And this is again the same problem. I really like the kind of motif here. So if you play bishop a3 here, you hit the queen, and if you play c5 to like block that, if you don't, right, if you just move, then this bishop hangs, and that's really where the problem comes from. So the bishop is still very, very weak. The queen is defending it, and the only places you can defend the bishop from are these 4 squares, and this bishop takes all 3 of the dark squares away, and the knight's already taken the light square away, so unfortunately your bishop hangs. So c5 you could try, but obviously it doesn't matter at all. Your bishop is just hanging, so you're going to have to try and make some plan here. And this is kind of a way that the engine says things should break down, but I think there's some other ways White probably would have done it. However, White didn't see this, and this is kind of tricky to see, and maybe similar to the previous move where they had bishop d2 to get against the backward c7 pawn. They maybe just missed the move order but had the idea. So they do see that bishop is a weakness and they can try and hit it. They can use it in some tactical manner. However, they sacked their rook for it before they did anything else, and this just flips the evaluation instantly. It was like +3 for white, and now it's -3 for black after they take back. There just isn't enough for white here. The bishop is still kind of protected by the queen. If it comes out now, it's kind of hitting nothing. The knight has fallen back, and it doesn't really have any amazing attacking squares just yet. It can come to c5, which does stop the extra pawn and does put some pressure on e6, but it's not really posing any concrete problems. Alright, so here black decides to just liquidate an extra pawn. Now white also has an isolated one. And white says, actually, I'm not going to take back because my bishop is hanging. So here goes the knight. Now the knight can take any of these pawns. Taking over on e6 is obviously also a fantastic fork. So black would be in big trouble if that happened. But they've got an easy way out of that. They got a check here on the d6 square. You could put your queen out here, but again, I don't think that's the safest way to go. You could probably just end up pushing the queen around, or depending on what you like about this position, you can take the bishop and the queen can't take back. So if you do something like this, I'll take your bishop and your queen is pinned to your king. So you kind of have to trade off. I take, you take, and yeah, this is clearly just very, very good for black. Alright, so up here, g is 3, just blocking the diagonal up, so pretty good. f4 obviously would have run into a little en passant action, which is no good. And here, black decided to continue pushing and liquidating the center. They still have a very, very safe h6 pawn. This knight, although it seems a bit silly on g8, is doing a good job to keep the king safe from that potential attack on the dark squares. And here they took with the knight, and again, one of these moves where you like think, oh, that's maybe not too bad, and this is apparently just really bad for white. The way they should have gone about it is just to take the pawn with the knight, because the knight is still the knight is still defended by the queen. And even if you take, for instance, it's still defended by the queen, right? So it doesn't really matter which way you go. White still at least has both pieces defended. Maybe you take back with the queen anyway, and then the game would go something like this. But black is up a knight, right? So you could very easily just defend, try to trade off queens, and black would be just up a piece until the end of the game, probably. Alright, let's just go back. Let's see over here. So e5, and then knight takes. And now this kind of involves the same problem. Currently, black is just better, right? They've got 2 extra pawns. They've got an exchange. And taking here kind of forces white's hand a little bit. The white queen can't go anywhere anymore besides here to help defend that bishop. And then that bishop is actually pinned to the queen. Or they could go over here, but then that knight hangs, so there's just too much for them to defend. So instead they just move the bishop off from the back rank so the rook can't take it. But now that black can trade off, they're just solidifying and crystallizing this advantage. 2 pawns and an exchange. But the game isn't over yet. Alright, we're going to go a little bit faster here. So knight out and queen over, king over, apologies. This pawn was actually weak already, but I think they were just kind of trying to trick a little bit here. Maybe I can trap your bishop. Maybe I can push your knight around, and then I can either try and take your f2 pawn or just push that up. Maybe I can come in here directly and just get your bishop, right? So you're trying to open up. I go here, and bishop's bye-bye. Alright, so white didn't fall for that though, and then they eventually just said, cool, I'm just going to protect the pawn by getting off the dark squares. In this case, I'm going to get a little bit further into the game. After we get to this position, bishop c1, unfortunate one, you walk into a potential fork here on the file, and although you can go here or here, this one obviously hangs, so this is not so good. But also, this rook is now pinning the f2 pawn to the king, so there's a lot of like small little tricks with something like the knight coming over here. Yeah, it's just not a great position for black to be in. Also, you gotta admit that probably something like this, even this is probably winning still. It's hard for white to defend two additional pawns. Although the bishop itself can normally do it, with the knight also in play, it's a little bit difficult to do that. Alright, but anyway, so they walked into this fork, unfortunately, and now we push the knight away, and we trade off, and now it's bishop versus rook. Up an exchange, up 2 pawns. Black is very, very winning. Trades off some pawns, pushes the bishop around. We continue going forward, continue trading off, getting closer to the endgame, getting closer to promotion. And we're going to get to this position here. And so in this position, I drew multiple arrows, and I'll quickly draw most of them again. Any rook move like this is winning for black. This one obviously just hangs the rook, so that's not good. Pushing this pawn is good. Pushing this pawn is good. Any of these king moves are winning for black. There's only 2 moves here that draw, and unfortunately, black played one of them. I'll show you. I just told you the one that is an unfortunate one. Here, the bishop now blocks your e pawn, defends against the c pawn's promotion, and the king and the other bishop and the king and the other pawn can take care of your g pawn. So black just has no way to make progress, but equally white probably just can't. They can't make progress either because the bishop always has to take care of all the pawns. So it's just a draw. Unfortunately, black played the other move that also draws, and it's one that probably feels quite natural as well, and that is to push your passed pawn forward, right? Push past pawns. However, normally you want to put your rooks behind passed pawns, right? And in this case, the rook is not behind it, but next to it, and after you play c2, the rook is trapped. So the rook can't go forward after the... Oh, sorry, let me just move the king over so it's obvious. Can't move forward, can't move sideways, can't go back. So in this case, you basically have to trade your rook for the pawn because there's nothing else to do. But in this situation, white has sufficient material, 3 pawns versus a bishop. The bishop's on the correct diagonal to stop all of these pawns from moving forward except this g1, and this g1 can be stopped by the king. So there's just very little to do. The other thing to understand is also that black doesn't have any mobile pieces, right? Only pawns. So only the king can move when it's their turn, which means white can kind of put them into zugzwang by just moving their bishop back and forth all the time, and black just never has a way to make progress here. So the game continued. King g4 trying to get in there, and king g2 just stopping the king from getting in there, goes back, pushes the pawn, and here comes the white king, now stopping the g pawn from moving. Bishop still topping the other two pawns from moving. So let's continue on. They drop the pawn, trying to get some play here. Bishop comes out, drop the other pawn, and I gotta give a little bit of style points here for black. It's obviously a draw. As soon as you queen, they're gonna take it, but they made a knight instead. So I I gotta give big style points to black, especially because it must have been really frustrating, clearly being better in the end game and then unfortunately blundering it away. But a really cool way, to end the game here. I thought that was really nice. So I'm gonna go back to the start quickly. A lot of things happened in this game, right? So from the fact that black probably surprised both of them a little bit, maybe black prepared, maybe black plays this over the board face to face, we don't know. But definitely neither player has this game online. I do feel that no d5 kind of came back to haunt black a tiny bit, because the dark square bishop never came out, so it wasn't the worst, but I think in that case what they had to do is they, apologies, had to play g6 or g5 here to fianchetto the dark square bishop instead, because after they played e6, the dark square bishop just never got into the game. So a really unfortunate way to go. Yeah, I mean, this is not a mistake as such, right? There's no like blunder here, but long term, the play just never allowed the dark square bishop to get out, so it was just kind of bad the whole game, which is very unfortunate. The other thing maybe for white then is that trading off on the c6 square, your light square bishop, when you put all your pawns on dark squares, I don't think that's very safe. Maybe just trying to trade off at least black's light square bishop is really good. I have a very, very fun line I like to play against the London, which involves, maybe I can put it on the board very quickly. But it basically, I'll do this. It involves potentially the light square bishop going on this diagonal, the queen being on b6, and pushing these pawns and getting knight f6 in the game. And the idea is that you're happy to double up your pawns on this side of the board, but you're eventually going to get pressure and potentially breaking pressure on the queen side. And part of that is your light square bishop is looking at the b1 square, so there's no rook able to come onto the b file to protect against your own push on the queen side. So for white to give up the light square bishop for the knight, I feel is a little bit incorrect. Not losing in any way, but it just doesn't really gel with the rest of the game, unfortunately. And it's not really worth it for that one doubled pawn situation. Maybe they were trying to play like a reverse Nimzo Indian a little bit, but probably the pawns needed to be in different positions then. Alright, so game continues. That's the first thing for me. I think both of these bishops were a little bit unfortunate. Probably not the happiest pieces in the game. Long term, it's just unfortunate little blunders. I don't think that's too much trouble. The thing, maybe for white then again, obviously black threw away their advantage in this case. White probably, so both players had a lot of time at the end of the game. I mean, over 20 minutes, I think, for both of them, if I'm not mistaken. Probably needed to try and calculate this pawn pushes a little bit more in the middle game. At some points, it was actually winning for them. Even if other points it wasn't winning, definitely you should be calculating this. And same for black, you got to be looking at these guys, even g5, all the time, trying to liberate your bad bishop here, trying to get a bit more control in the center, because white is definitely pushing into black here. So yeah, anyway, trade off, all good. Unfortunate one, trying to put the bishop somewhere where it could get out. Definitely, the bishop f8 is just a very, bishop f1, this is a very kind of normal move. I think Feingold has one of the rules where like always play bishop f1. And the point is that a bishop next to your king, it's still got a good amount of scope into the opposite side of the board, but it also helps to protect the pawns in front of your king, which could get very useful in the case where his opponents attack you on the king side. But anyway, so that happens. Unfortunate for white not to find the correct idea with the correct move order, because I can see that they saw, the potential here, the pin, the bishop not being able to protect the pawn and so on, but they just didn't quite have enough attackers for the situation. They needed to kind of what's the word, resolve the middle of the board a little bit. They could have used those pawns to their advantage at this point. Yeah, here again, this is just tactics. I think at this point we have enough time. Both players should have seen this. Both players should have tried to avoid it. Definitely they're strong enough, so I think maybe just the game was so intense and they've already been kind of funneled in their thinking on certain points that they both just missed it. But clearly the king is overworked here. It's protecting two pieces, and after you take the one, then the other take comes with check, so definitely something you want to look at. But anyway, so that's okay, that happens. Same kind of situation here, maybe white insisting on their h6 pressure. There's so many ways that pressure can get broken. I don't think it's worth committing to it to this degree, but it happens. f6 being a mistake is kind of insane. It looks like such a natural move. You're trying to break out the situation. Maybe because the bishop has been bad the whole game, maybe something like this could have worked as well. I think you still have a bit of like, calculation here if that gets taken and if the queen comes in and everything. The rook's at the back here, so maybe take and then there and then the queen comes in, and what do you do then? But yeah, maybe trying to just trade off your terrible bishop for the knight that is so active and scary is another way you could have thought about it. But anyway, and here then just an unfortunate one for white. I'm not sure if they saw ghosts or something, but taking the bishop, unfortunately, the terrible bishop for the very active rook. It's an unfortunate play. And then from there, I mean, just still so much going on, and clearly black is very good. So big ups to white as well for not just resigning, clearly being worse. Exchange two pawns. And big no-no for black not to play a little bit slower. I'm gonna kind of say you almost have 40 minutes on your clock at this point. Yeah, this happens to all of us. If it hasn't happened to you yet, it's gonna happen to you. You're gonna play too fast in a winning position and throw it away by accident. But yeah, black also obviously had a lot of pressure on them all games, so good of them not to succumb to all of it. And just such a roller coaster, such a fun game to analyze afterwards. Really well done to both players as well. There's a lot of obviously mistakes, but who doesn't make mistakes? And in turn, both players played really good in positions where they were under pressure. Black was under pressure a lot of the time in the game, and white was clearly losing but didn't give up. And in the end, a draw. Maybe morally that is definitely the best result for this game, so congratulations to both. And a last little style points for black for promoting to a knight. Really cool. Alright, and that's it. Thank you very much for watching. This was another one of our subscribers games. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want your own game to be reviewed, as I always say, I don't have hours of free time, but I'm willing to have the conversation, so let me know. And if you watched until this point, just thank you very much. We really appreciate the support, and I really hope that you enjoy the content on the channel. We're trying a few different things, so I hope to see you next time. Be safe and take care. Bye-bye.